Welcome to Sculpture Vulture. I'm Lucy Branch, a sculptural conservator and author who is endlessly fascinated by public sculpture. I bring you a series of interviews with sculptors and other fascinating people involved in the field that inspires me, and I hope will do the same for you. You can see the photographs that accompany the episode and the show notes at sculpturevulture.co.uk. Hello Sculpture Vultures, and thank you for joining me today. This week's episode is going to be a solo show, and the reason for that is that I have just finished another novel at the beginning of this week, and I am on a bit of a high. Also, feel like when you accomplish something that has been a long-term project for you, that you should take a moment to savour it and just sit with it and kind of doff your hat to it. And I didn't want to charge into preparing another interview. I just wanted to sort of take a moment, and it's quite difficult to do that when you have a schedule, like a podcast schedule. And so I hope you will permit me for making this quite an informal show. It's going to be nearly entirely unscripted, so we'll just have to see what happens with that. And you might ask me, could I have planned that better? But do you know what? The answer is no. Frankly, when you are creating anything, as I'm sure you know, you put parameters in place and you kind of hope to goodness that you're going to be able to work inside those parameters. But truthfully, it's not always in our control. And this has never happened to me before, actually. I really did catch my wind, I'm going to say, about the new year. And I suddenly, the second half of the book just galloped through me. I felt it just gained loads of momentum. And so although my provisional deadline for the book was September, actually, I'm way ahead. This novel that I've written isn't one that I think you as my audience will particularly enjoy. There's no sculpture, there is no restoration even, there's no metals involved at all, but it's a historical romance and set in the 17th century. First romance really I've ever done. Proper romance I've ever done. A little bit of romance in my other books, but really it's not the feature of the story. But this is a part of history that I have always been fascinated with. And actually there's a great podcast called 1666 and all that, and I've been listening along to it and getting more and more enthusiastic about this story that had been percolating through my mind. I kept bashing it away for a long time and kind of thinking, no, it doesn't fit within my kind of brand and my remit. I know brand is such a kind of wanky word, isn't it? But you know what I mean, as in people know the kind of thing that I do and they expect a certain type of book, and yet it just, I don't know, it just came out. So that's what happens sometimes, and I think you have to just listen to the muse. So I did, and we will see what goes on there. It's quite interesting to be, I think I might even publish this under a pen name, and because it doesn't work alongside my other books, so that's quite a nice little thing to do as well, something I haven't done before, which is work under another name. So today's show is going to be a brief Q&A with me. Over the last month, I've had quite a few questions slip into my DMs, quite general questions, but also a couple of conservation-y ones, which might be interesting to you as well. And it might be nice to bring those all together. There might be some answers there that interest you as well. And at the very end of the episode, I thought I would read the very first chapter of my last novel, Restoration Murder. I am not going to be offended if you decide to stop listening then. If you are not really into kind of cozy mysteries, this is a murder mystery, but it might just accompany you while you're doing something dull, and I thought you might enjoy it. A little sample. Just to start by mentioning the bit in news that has kind of been on the radar in the last couple of weeks. There's been the big hoo-ha about the Gill sculpture in it's Prospero and Ariel at the main entrance. It's above the main entrance of the BBC building on Regent Street in London. I'm probably going to write a bit of an article on Substack about this, about my thoughts about it. But just to set aside the elephant that is whether we should have sexual predators deserving to have their works protected, I've probably got a little bit of a controversial view on that. I'm not somebody that feels like everybody's work, even if you are the level that Gill sort of achieved, I'm not somebody that necessarily thinks we should bow down to that. But I'm not going to talk about that really. I wanted to say how awful the screen is that they've put up in front of it. I mean, I really think that screening statues is a terrible idea for all sorts of reasons, actually. But I do think that this is the perfect example of why you shouldn't screen a sculpture to protect it. There's tons of statues that have had antisocial behaviour. There's tons of ways of preventing bad behaviour. And actually, this sculpture is no different to many others, which are actually lower level than Gill's work. I mean, to get up there, you have to be fairly brave. And obviously, it didn't stop the statue being vandalised, but there's lots of statues that get vandalised, which have to use other ways and means of protecting them. And I just think they've got a listed building there and they have stuck this screen up in front of that statue and it looks dreadful. I can't believe that actually on a listed building, I'm sure this is grade 1 listed, I can't believe they've been allowed to do that. I know that, I've dealt with like grade 2 listed renovation work in my own life, and that's a bit of a nightmare, to flipping the permissions and the hoops you have to jump through just to be able to do the tiniest little thing which you think isn't even, visually significant. And this is really visually significant. I am really actually horrified at the mess that building looks now because of the screen. So yes, I would encourage you to take a look if you haven't seen it, and we'll leave the other uglier part of the story to one side for today. So the first question that I was recently DM'd was, should I use smart water to protect my sculpture? Well, it was Phil Cleary who invented the smart water. It's kind of like traceable liquid, I think in the early 90s, I'm going to say. And it has a kind of chemical tag in it, which is detectable if it's exposed to ultraviolet light. And that tag is kept in a database, a smart water database, and you can compare that identifier with the code if the object is stolen, the bronze, say, is stolen, and thieves. Actually, I think it comes off on clothes and things, so it can actually mark the person, but more likely it is about identifying the object. Now, it sounds like a really excellent idea, this, and lots of collectors and things do put it on their bronzes. It can't really hurt the bronze per se. I mean, yeah, it's not great to have water on things, but we know that bronzes are outdoors all the time and you're only putting it in small little areas. But the reason it isn't a great idea is because, sadly, as much as you might love your bronze, absolutely adore it and think that everybody else will adore it, mostly thieves are stealing bronzes to melt down. And smart water is not going to survive that. And it's not going to protect that. So actually, 99% of bronzes that are stolen, that's what happens. Sad but true. And also, if you have been listening to the show and if you know anything about my books, you'll know that I talk a lot about maintenance, and actually the maintenance process that we have to do to reduce kind of degradation and slow down degradation interferes with the functioning of smart water. So if you put a protective coating, a wax coating, say, over the top of the surface of the bronze, which you should, it is a barrier layer between the smart water and the person. So very little chance that it's going to rub off on somebody if it's got a decent protective coated layer on it. So that's inhibiting the way the smart water was intended to work. And also, I don't know whether there is it actually lessens its, functionality, should we say, with the coating on it. I don't think anyone's actually confirmed that, but my suspicion would be that it might. So yes, great idea in theory, not such a brilliant idea in practice. How did the novel writing you do come about? Okay, this is a good question because it is not a natural bedfellow for me, I suppose, given that I am a very practical person. I work on site, working with sculpture all the time, and novel writing doesn't sound like it's necessarily, sort of simpatico with that, does it? But most of my books, apart from the one I've just written, most of my books are about sculpture. And I got the first idea because I wanted to write about a patineur. And as you, I'm sure, are all as enthusiastic about patination as I am, you will know what an art it is, what a beautiful thing can be created with the kind of skills that a patineur has. And when you think about how simple some of the chemicals are and actually what a range of finishes that it can give, it's that first novel is almost like an ode to the patineur or an ode to patinated sculpture. And I kind of got the idea initially because a friend of mine had been researching a historic document in a library in Italy for their PhD. And they'd basically left it on their reading bench while they went out and got a sandwich. When they came back, there was this note slid into the book, and it was a warning to not pursue the material that was in that book. Quite a scary kind of like, we're watching you type thing. This poor guy was quite shaken and also wasn't sure whether it was a joke or not, but anyway made the decision to actually return the book and not pursue it. I don't think it seemed like it was significant enough to make a difference to their PhD. But that got me thinking, what on earth was in that old, really ancient, this is like rare books, and it was really, really, dusty, and probably no one had looked at it forever. But I was like, what on earth was in that book that somebody felt needed to be protected? I mean, you could say, oh, they were pulling their leg. Maybe they were, but also maybe they weren't. And it was this kind of like nugget of idea that there was something being protected in that book that got me thinking about writing what is a kind of mystery thriller about the classic myth of alchemy, which is kind of where my book intersects with patination. So it's a kind of contemporary story about alchemy. And I really thoroughly enjoyed writing it because I was able to write about my favourite things in patination, things that I think are kind of poetic and yet also kind of weave in this kind of conspiracy theory about alchemy. And so it came about, I would say, out of me spending hours and hours and hours working on statues and not having music on. It wasn't very easy in those days to have music on. We didn't have earpods and phones in the way that we do now. And it was the silence, and this story started to build itself up in my head, and I would be working with my hands for hours and hours, and this story started block by block to assemble in my mind. And I was like, okay, I'm going to write this down. And so I used to put my kids to bed, oh God, in those days where the babies are really little and you'd be exhausted, but it's like 7:30, the kids would go down to bed and I would get them down. I would walk straight to the kettle, I would make a cup of tea, and without looking left or right, I would walk straight to my desk and I would knock out an hour and a half on the computer. My poor husband didn't see me much, but it was like a ritual, a routine. It was a great way to decompress. And I just went into this. And because in the daytime I had been thinking about the scenes that I wanted to write, they just came out. And I'm really proud of that book. I'm not going to say that it's a literary great on any level. I think it's the kind of book that has got a good story if you're into metals, if you're into sculpture, and you like a bit of a thrillery ride. It's lots of fun on that score. But I mean, it was my first novel, and I'm sure by the time I've written 50 novels, I might be a much better writer. And I'm absolutely certain, Stephen King, he says that first novel might have the greatest concept, but not necessarily be constructed in the best possible way. You certainly become better as you go along. At least I hope that is so. And I do think the second novel, which is Rust Upon My Soul, which follows the first, I think is probably better written, but it all kind of, that's a series, but it all kind of, came from that first moment. What do you think about people stroking Molly Malone's breasts? Referring, of course, to the statue in Dublin, which has had quite a lot of press recently about, the antisocial behaviour, bad behaviour that surrounds this sculpture. And all of us know that many, many bronze sculptures get stroked and touched. If anyone's been to Florence, you've got the hog there that gets his nose stroked. The tails on the lions at Trafalgar Square have been stroked so much that they even have, cracks in them. We used to repatinate those little areas regularly to recolour, because bronze is so bright, the substrate, once it's polished and once the patina is removed, it kind of draws people in. And so then it's a kind of beacon. It shows you where you should touch it. And as much as I think that the statue shouldn't be touched the way it is, I don't necessarily think that all of it is about kind of cheeky lads being rude to women. I think that a lot of it is to do with the psychology of the way people behave around public sculpture, and that's not specific to Molly Malone, that's on a bigger scale. And what I mean by that is that there are modes of behaviour that tends to happen around public sculpture. One of the things is the kind of broken window theory, which is well known, where some antisocial act occurs. It used to be that windows were broken and there's graffiti around and that kind of thing, and it adds to the general permission of bad behaviour to be okay in that area. And what this is that because that surface has been polished, it's kind of like giving permission to other people to do it. It's kind of showing that someone else has done it, and therefore it feels to other people like that's okay because it was permitted. So one of the ways that we stop antisocial behaviour happening around sculpture is to stop that cycle. So the reason you might repatinate Molly Malone's chest is because you are trying to signal that stroking it and polishing it is not something that you want people to do. So by putting it back to how it should look, the darker colour, first of all, it isn't so shiny, which makes people kind of dazzle and want to touch it, but also it's kind of signalling that that is how it should look, not any other way. And so it seems like quite a strange idea to people. They're like, oh, well, people will just stroke it off again. Sometimes that is the case, but actually quite often having to do it, reinstate it a few times, suddenly people start to do it less and it trails off. There is not research on this, but I have got many years of experience and I've seen how you can break those cycles, and that is one way. Another way would be to put a flower bed round her so that it's harder for people to actually get to her. It's easy to touch her, therefore it's easy to do. But if you can make that a little bit more difficult, keep the public off her a little bit more by widening her boundary, her little island, that would help as well, for sure. Wardens. That's something that other towns do. They have wardens that walk the areas and they encourage people not to do things. And again, it's about breaking the habit cycle of people, how they behave around that sculpture. It's a really weird sheep thing, behaviour. Sometimes people are asked, oh, why did you graffiti that? Or why did you do? And that's actually mostly because they were like, we saw someone else do it. Someone else threw something at the statue, so we did it. And you're like, oh my goodness, what on earth is going on here? Why aren't people thinking for themselves? But actually, they're not thinking for themselves. They're copying what somebody else did and it looked fun and they did it. I mean, honestly, I suppose like a crowd mentality and a kind of, there is odd behaviour in humans which you can't account for, and they wouldn't do in another context. If you put them in a different scenario, they would probably balk at such a reaction, but the fact that it's kind of suggested to them and then they follow it, we are odd beings is all I can say. And that genuinely seems to be the root of a lot of the causes of this kind of behaviour around. I don't think it's all about, sort of cheeky chaps trying to be leering over Molly Malone. I think that's only part of the problem. What books have had the biggest influence on you? Oh, goodness. I'm not going to go down the fiction route. I'm not going to go down the fiction route because I probably can't get you a short list for fiction. But I'm going to mention a couple of non-fiction, or 2 or 3, that I think are really brilliant. Gay Hendricks' The Big Leap, a great book. A really good book if anybody is interested in kind of like professional development. It's all about the cycles that we tend to repeat over and over again and how to kind of break those cycles and jump to the next level professionally or personally. It's a really easy read. He's very engaging, and I think that is one of the classics. It definitely helped me to kind of level up with my own work and things. So highly recommended. A really good health book, if anybody's looking to up their fitness and health, is Younger Next Year. Now, let me think of who has written that, but it is really blooming good. There's 2 authors. One of them is like, Joe Average, and he's also got a doctor who he went to see, and the doctor narrates some of the chapters, and then this other chap writes the other ones, and it's his kind of experience of improving your health year upon year, and as you age, getting healthier. And it's Chris Crowley and Henry Lodge, and Chris Crowley is the kind of Joe Average, and he's great. He's got some really non-fussy advice and very kind of, get yourself in order kind of thing, but really, really inspiring, and kind of makes you kind of think, yeah, I'm going to be younger next year. Don't we all want that? I'm heading for 50 this year. I've got a big birthday. So yes, that's been a really, I'd say, a major influence on my life and has made my health significantly better. I've struggled with some health issues, unfortunately, as many people do. But that book has transformed the landscape of my health, and I can really, really recommend that one. And the final one is Essentialism by Greg McKeown. Really cracking book, all about looking at things in your life that are kind of essentialism, and other things that are not, and kind of like knowing yourself and being able to kind of identify what it is that you should be spending your time on. Really, really great book. Try and read it. I think all these 3 books that I've just mentioned, I kind of try to read them on a semi-regular basis, like every year or 2. I think the health one I kind of pick up every year because it's such a good one. But the other 2, I kind of, every couple of years I'll reread them because they've got really solid, usable, practical wisdom of making you, improve yourself and your work and general state of mind. And that actually leads into another question I had, which was about managing my time with the podcast and the books and the work. And what I would say about that is I tend to work on the podcast for a week, and I take interviews all the time, but I work on the production of the podcast on 1 week and I write on another week. So that's why the podcast is dropped every fortnight, because if I had to do it every week, I would not get time to write, and I want to write. So that's what I do. I kind of cycle in and out, podcast and then fiction, podcast and fiction every other week, and that is how I manage to stay on track. And obviously the main part of my life, my conservation company, that takes up the majority of the hours in my day. So a lot of the podcast is really done early doors in the morning, about 4:30 in the morning. So is the writing, and then I might get a little bit of time sometimes later in the day, and if I do, then I will use that up too. But yes, it has to be very efficient. Have to squeeze it into the corners of life, but I do think I do that because, it's well worth it. One of the other questions actually linking to this again, we'll make it a whole batch, was somebody asked what was the most surprising thing I'd learnt since starting the podcast. And the most surprising thing I had learnt was that I couldn't live without it. So I didn't think that would be the case when I began. I just thought it was a project that I wanted to do. But, I was away for a couple of years, wasn't I, unfortunately with family matters, which are still no better, and have to also be fit into life. I'm sure many of you must be involved in caring for family members. And yes, that's where I'm at, still very much involved with caring for my mum. But, if you don't do the other things that light you up, and this lights me up, life's not really worth living, is it? So I get a lot of joy from this. I get a lot of joy from the wonderful people that I speak to and the interesting people that I come across. And that's been a real surprise to me, that something that is you don't realise how many hours it takes to produce a podcast. I mean, I have no producer. Of somebody I know runs their own podcast and was talking to me about it recently, and they were like, oh yes, I just give my producer all that. And I was like, yeah, I'm producer, bottle washer, host, the lot. And so it does take an awful lot of time, but definitely worth it. So this is the last question on the list for the moment, and it is, are you carrying on with the podcast? Da 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 da. Sinister music. I've decided that I'm definitely going to carry on so that I can fulfill a whole year of having podcasted. That's a lovely goal. I kind of didn't expect to do a whole year. I thought I'd just see how the mood took me, and I will definitely make my goal of a year. So that will be a year in June. So I've got tons more recordings that will take us up to that point. I think I might have a pause over the summer. I think July and August would be a really good time to pause. I might be able to do something that drops in to the feed during those months, but I'm not going to commit to that. We'll see. But I want to have a little think about next year, about what I'm going to do, if I'm going to do the same, more of the same, or if I'm going to try something different. I'm getting quite a lot of pressure from various angles to do more video. And I've thought about this a lot. I don't love the idea of it. I've got a hilarious video of me trying to do a video in front of a monument in a lovely, beautiful sculpture, such a stunning sculpture, but it just represents all the difficulties of trying to shoot in front of public sculpture. The road is stupidly loud. I mean, it's not even a busy road, but the traffic in the vicinity just echoes around it. So I'm kind of trying to fight that. Then there's I don't know how, but there's a wind tunnel in that zone, and you can hear the wind hitting the kind of microphone. So that's another, it's like having a little drum going on in the background. Then, and also, my hair is being blown everywhere. So any thought of looking slightly stylish, I sometimes see these lovely curators wandering around doing TikTok videos and things. And I look at them and they look so serene and tidy. And I'm like, actually, I look like I've been pulled through a hedge backwards because it's so windy and you obviously can't control the weather. And then finally in this video, honestly, it's out of some kind of comic scene, is this man cutting his grass. Oh, it's hilarious. He's in, he's out, he's up, he's down. If he's not leaf blowing, he's hedge trimming. If he's not on his really loud, petrol tractor, he's blooming clipping things. It was just, so I don't know. Videos and sculpture may not actually be a feasible thing, but I don't know, maybe it's something to think about. Maybe it's something I might do in between other episodes, which are just regular podcast episodes. But I want to have time to think and to plan, and also that time will be given over to making sure that my fiction book, my other project, is underway, because there's so many things that have to be done when a book is finished. So many other, I've got to send it to professional editors, and there's various other things that have to go on. So it'd be nice to get a chance to do those too. So This is the point in the show where if you'd like to say goodbye to me, I will say goodbye and see you in a couple of weeks. But if you are interested in hanging around and hearing a sample of my previous book, Restoration Murder, then I would love you to join me, and I hope I can do it justice. I'm certainly not a professional narrator, have never done any narrating, but I'll give it a go. Why not? Chapter 1, 1986. Moishe Schreiber stood at the edge of the sea and admired the illuminated outline of the pier. It was too dark to see the waves, which were to be his audience. But their energy was present, and the darkness made it easier to imagine he was about to perform at the Royal Albert Hall. He only had time for one song tonight. There was a train to catch, so it would have to be Puccini's Nessun Dorma. He took a deep breath and released the passion he usually kept buried inside himself day in and day out. As his fine voice met the waves and their sounds tumbled together, Moishe felt a rare bubble of bliss burst in his chest. It was the balm he needed to soothe away the soreness of a life which chafed his soul every day. The drama of the music filled him as his lungs drew in the saline air, and his voice began to crescendo. It wasn't that opera singing was forbidden to an Orthodox Jew, but no one else he knew did it, and people in his community loved to gossip about eccentricities. As he rose to the challenge of the climax, a sharp pain suddenly dug into his right-hand side, then another to his left. He grunted and fell onto all fours, spittle dribbling from his lips. This wasn't the way his idols finished their arias. His heart rate sped up at the crunch of someone on the stones behind him, sharpening the pain in his sides. In London, a city oozing crime from every crevice, he was never afraid. Yet on this quiet beach, which had probably never seen a misdemeanour more terrible than littering, the hairs on the back of his neck were standing tall. The pain ebbed away. Maybe he had a kidney stone. He should get it checked out. He sat back on his heels and pushed himself up off the uneven surface. He swallowed down saliva, noticing a metallic taste in his mouth, and turned his head. The person behind him, a man, was quite close now, but he couldn't see him properly. The lack of moon or stars in the dark night made it impossible, but also his sight had become strangely blurred. Moishe. He immediately relaxed at the familiar voice. "What are you still doing here? You've caught me at rather an embarrassing moment, a little indisposed. I might have to trouble you for some help." "I want it back, Moishe." The man's tone rasped. Moishe's breathing stalled. He knew. Maybe that metallic taste had been guilt all along. He tried to summon some saliva to flush it away, but apart from gaping, his mouth seemed incapable of all other normal functions. But how much did he know? He hadn't asked for it all back. Whatever happened, Moishe mustn't let him take the watch. There was hardly any sound to his voice when he said, "I'm not sure what you're talking about." "You're a pathetic liar." The man grabbed Moishe's lapel and jerked him forward. Moishe found his gums meeting the man's fleshy hand. This gave him an idea. He dipped his chin and bit down as hard as he could, and at the same time he brought his knee up to hit a bullseye on his attacker down below. A grunting rasp verbalised his assailant's surprise. The grip slackened and Moishe dropped his shoulder, slipping out of his restraint. He then ran as fast as his wobbly legs would go on pebbles. It was an ungainly sprint, but he was moving fast enough for it to dislodge his kippah. He raised a hand to hold it in place, and just as he made the pavement at the edge of the beach, another lash of pain spiked through his gut. He pitched to one side, falling against a parked car. Before righting himself, he was grabbed again. Moishe tried to form words, but nothing came out. He felt hands scurry through his coat pockets, finding his inside pocket last and dragging out the slender book wedged tightly inside. Thank goodness, it seemed he was only searching for the book right now. This comforting thought only lasted a heartbeat as another grenade of pain went off in his gut and Moishe jerked upright, the spasm forcing his arms to shoot out, unintentionally knocking the book from the grabbing hands. The force was such that the little book was propelled upwards, just as Moishe was released from the grip of the contraction and slumped forward against the car in relief. The book met the roof and slid a little way, but was stopped from falling further by his top lip, which was pressed against the chilled glass. The window was very slightly ajar. He ran his hand up the surface of the door so that his fingertips met the book's edge, and at the very same second he felt hands on his shoulders dragging him backwards. The intent to steady the book turned into a desperate fumbling, and the little object balanced on the lip of the window edge, tilted and posted itself neatly through the slender gap. Both were silent for a moment, contemplating the loss of the book. "At least there's the watch," the man said. Moishe squeezed his eyes shut and slipped his hand into his trouser pocket where the gold watch nestled. It gave him strength. He saw it in his mind's eye, the crisp white diamonds embedded in the emerald face, but its significance to his life surpassed even its beauty. It was his ticket out. He couldn't let it be taken. It might have been a further symptom of his stomach contractions or perhaps the vehemence of his feelings, but he turned head down and belched a barrel of vomit. The pair separated and Moishe threw himself forward off the pavement and back onto the beach, bent over like a comma. His drive to protect his watch provided unknown reserves. Once on the pebbles, his legs paddled as he struggled to gain sound footing. The tide was in, and he made 3 large strides before he collapsed. He heard the man's approach as his stomach screamed for the last time, and he groaned, then curled up and pushed one hand, which clutched his precious watch, into his groin. With the other he tugged, rather than stroked, his prayer tassel. "Hashem," he whispered, "if you're listening, I promise I'll never sing again if you would only help me now." His faith had never been stronger than in that moment, but each approaching step shook what had already been a weak foundation. The edge of his vision was darkening. He stared out at the waves, his audience, which rose and clamoured for him. Moishe's trembling hand drew the watch from his pocket. "Man plans and God laughs," he whispered in Yiddish, as he put every last ounce of life into propelling the watch as far into the sea as he could. I hope you enjoyed that. The book goes on to the present day, and the story is about Ben Robertson, who is the next person to find the watch. I hope you have a good 2 weeks, and I look forward to bringing you an interview with Nigel Hall in another couple of weeks.